I'm Dr. Muscle, and in this video we'll be discussing how to assess categorical syllogisms using the rules method. And I would argue that this is actually a faster way to assess categorical syllogisms than the Venn diagram method. Look, both of them are equally valid, if you will. They're both fairly quick, sort of, once you get the hang of them. But I think this is even faster than drawing overlapping circles a la the Venn diagram method. So provided you can sort of commit these to memory and start to feel comfortable using them and applying them to these various arguments, then I think this is a nice quick method to easily determine whether a categorical syllogism is valid or invalid. So as usual, before we really dive in, we have to discuss some basic concepts that are going to be necessary to then employ the rules. So the two concepts are essential here. The first we've already discussed way back when I was first illuminating the standard form claims to begin with, and when I mentioned that, look, some of them are positive or affirmative, I should say, and some of them are negative, right? They're either inclusive or they're exclusive, okay? And that's going to be critical here when you're employing the rules method, right? So specifically, A and I claims are affirmative claims, right? They're inclusive. Whereas E and O claims are negative claims, they are excluding, right? Something is not something, or no something or other, or something else. So we have the idea of affirmative and negative, right? So you're going to want to remember that, affirmative claims and negative claims, okay? So I've illustrated that up here. And then the new concept we have to familiarize ourselves with in terms of using the rules method here is what's known as distribution, okay? So, all right, when is a term distributed and when isn't it? Okay, well, a term is distributed if and only if the claim says something about all members in that class or category that the term identifies, right? So, for example, if we are told all cats are animals, the term cat is distributed, right? We know something, we're being told something about all cats, namely that they're animals, right? So a term is distributed, again, if we're being told something about all members of that class that term labels. Okay? So no dogs are cats, right? We're being told something about both all dogs and all cats, namely that they're not the other one, right? So no dogs are cats. We know something definitively about all dogs, and we know something definitively about all cats, right? Namely, they're not one another. So I have put in squares, right, what terms are distributed in each of the standard form claims. So notice in the I standard form claim, neither the subject nor the predicate are distributed, right? Just because some snakes are poisonous snakes, right? We don't know anything definitively about all snakes or all poisonous snakes. We just know that some snakes are poisonous snakes. Okay. Now, O, I think, is the trickiest. You'll just kind of have to commit this one to memory, I think. And basically the idea is that the predicate, whatever's named in the predicate, we know something definitively about all the predicate, right? Namely that they're not the some S that are being referred to in the subject, right? So some animals are not cats, right? We know something about all the cats, namely that they're not the some animals that aren't the cats. And again, I know that's pretty confusing or sounds pretty confusing, but just commit this one to memory, right? So there's again, these squares are what's being distributed in each of the standard form claims. Okay, so again, note I, nothing is distributed in a standard form I claim. Otherwise, there's at least one term that's being distributed in the other three standard form claims. Note that E have both of them distributed. Okay, and that's really all you need to know, other than the rules themselves, to then be able to apply the rules. Okay, so let's go ahead and turn our focus then to the rules themselves. Right, so the idea here is that you have a categorical syllogism before you, right? So I've gone ahead and put up the first example I'm going to use here in a moment up on the board. And the idea is, right, you apply each of these rules, you ask yourself, does the argument, right, the categorical syllogism satisfy this first rule? If it does, okay, you can put like a little mental check in your mind. Okay, it's good, that's good. But as long as it violates or does not satisfy one of the rules, then the argument is invalid. Okay, and it might be the case that it violates two of them, right? So all that matters though is that it's violating at least one of them. If one or more of the rules are violated or not satisfied, then the categorical syllogism is invalid. Okay, but provided all three are satisfied, right? Then in that case, the categorical syllogism would be diagnosed as valid. Okay, so what are the specific rules? Rule 1, and you always want to associate Rule 1 with this particular rule, and Rule 2 with this particular rule, and Rule 3 with this particular rule, because you'll be asked to diagnose why a particular categorical syllogism is invalid, right? And if you say Rule 2 and really it's this one, then that'll be counted wrong. So you want to, again, associate this one specifically with Rule 1, this one with Rule 2, and this one with Rule 3. So Rule 1 is there must be the same number of negative claims in the conclusion as there are in the premises. So one cool thing about this is you know right off the bat that if you have two negative premises, right, so an E and an O claim, let's say, it's already invalid. You know that it's invalid. Why? Because you can only have one claim in the conclusion, right? So the most negative claims you have in the conclusion ever is 1, right? So as soon as you have 2 negative premises, it's going to automatically be invalid. The most premises that can be negative are 1, okay? So look, it has to be the same number of negative claims in the conclusion as are in the premises, okay? Rule 2, the middle term must be distributed in one of the premises. So this will harken back on, one of the things we talked about in the Venn diagram video, being able to correctly label your minor term, your major term, and the middle term. So you'll remember the minor term is the subject of the conclusion, the major term is the predicate, and the middle term is the one not mentioned in the conclusion. Okay, so what this is telling us, again, the middle term must be distributed in one of the premises, right? So the middle term, in this case, philosophers, right, it has to be distributed, appear in one of these standard form claims in the premises, right, and be distributed, okay? And so we'll go through examples where we'll sort of apply that and you'll see how that works, okay? But as long as, if you can see that the middle term is in fact not distributed in one of the premises, then the argument will be labeled invalid. Okay, and finally, any term distributed in the conclusion has to also be distributed in the premises, okay, somewhere in the premises. Okay, so in this example, look, since an I claim doesn't have either term distributed, we don't have to worry about it, right? Because neither one of these is distributed, we can automatically just put a check mark next to that one, right? But what if this was an E claim for a conclusion? Then both those terms must also be distributed somewhere in the premises, okay? So that's really all there is to it. So having gone through the rules and the two basic concepts they're built upon, namely affirmative and negative claims and the idea of distribution, we're in a position now to go ahead and, again, practice. Go through and basically, look at various categorical syllogisms and apply the rules to see if the syllogism violates any of the rules. If it does violate at least one or more of the rules, it's considered invalid. If it doesn't, then it will be considered valid. Okay, so let's go ahead and assess the one that I have up here already. So our first rule must have the same number of negative claims in the conclusion as the premises. So this is not a negative claim, right? This is an I claim, which is positive. Okay, so we better not have any negative premises, and in fact we don't. That's another I claim, and that's an A claim. Both of those are positive. So look, it satisfies rule 1. Okay, the second rule, the middle term, which I already mentioned earlier, right? Philosophers in this example had better be distributed in one of the premises. Okay, so let's see if that's in fact the case. So the first premise, right, is an A claim, a standard form A claim. Now only the subject is considered distributed in an A claim. Philosophers appears as the predicate in that claim, so it is not distributed in that first premise. Now we know that the second premise, as I mentioned earlier, is an I claim. Neither the subject nor the predicate are being distributed in an I claim, so it in fact is not distributed in either one of the premises. We know already then that it violates one of the rules, namely rule 2, right? So we already know that this is invalid. Now I would still encourage you to always go through all 3 rules. I want you to identify if there's more than one rule that's violated, right? That you identify all the rules that are violated, not just one of them. So let's go ahead and ask ourselves if it satisfies rule 3 here. Any term distributed in the conclusion must be distributed in the premises. Well, remember, neither one of these is distributed because it's an I claim. Okay, so it satisfies that because there's none to check for because there are none that are distributed in the conclusion. Okay, so this is an invalid categorical syllogism because it violates rule 2 of the rules method, right, of the rules. Now, if we were to do a Venn diagram of this, it would also show as invalid using the Venn diagram method, right? We could diagram the first 2 premises, and then we'd see that the conclusion was not implied in that diagram of the premises. Okay. But here again, we're focusing on the rules method. So I have here, some grapes are not sour, all fruits are sour, consequently some grapes are not fruits. Okay. You might have noticed that sour is not going to work, right? Something we've been talking about and reiterating in all these videos. When it comes to standard form claims, these terms have to be nouns or noun phrases, and adjective won't work, so I would have to slightly change that. So premise 1 would be something like, some grapes are not sour. We could just put things, right? I mean, it can be food, sour things, anything along those lines, right? But now it's a, it's no longer just an adjective. Premise 2, all fruits are sour. We'll say things. Okay. And they want us to conclude, consequently, some grapes are not fruits. Okay. So now there are going to be many instances where you're going to, and this is always kind of funky for the rookie logic student, which most of you guys are, right, to be calling an argument valid when it seems so obviously the case that a premise or multiple premises are just absurdly false, right? We know that it's not the case that all fruits are sour things, but as we'll soon discover here, this is nonetheless a valid argument, right? Provided these two premises are true, this conclusion will have to follow, okay? So again, it seems a little, I just wanted to point that out, that a lot of times it can seem weird to us at first when we're first getting into logic and studying logic, to call this sort of argument valid when it has, an obviously false sort of premise, okay? But again, when you're applying the concept of validity to an argument, you're asking yourself, assuming these premises are true, does this conclusion have to be true? That's all you care about. You don't care about whether the premises are in fact true. Okay, so let's go ahead and apply the rules though and see why it satisfies all three rules here. So the first one, it has to have the same number of negative claims in the conclusion as it does in the premises. Well, there's one negative here, right? This is an O claim, which is negative. Okay, we got that not. Okay, well, we also have an O claim here. Okay, and this is not a negative, so it does equal, right? We have one in the premises and one in the conclusion. Okay, so that one's satisfied. The middle term must be distributed in the, one of the premises. So what's the middle term here? Okay, it looks like, what is it, sour things. Okay, so sour things is the middle term. It's the what's not listed in the conclusion. Okay, so let's go see if sour things is distributed in one of the premises. It is. We go up to an O claim, right, and we know the predicate is distributed. That is, that the sour things is a predicate in this first premise. So we know that it is being distributed in that O claim. So we've satisfied this. Okay, now it's not distributed here, right? The predicate of an A standard form claim is not distributed, but it was distributed in the first premise. So it still satisfies that second rule. And finally, any term distributed in the conclusion must be distributed in the premises. So what's being distributed here? We have an O claim, right? So we know the predicate, the predicate is being distributed so in the conclusion, so this predicate or fruits had better be distributed somewhere in the premises. And what do you know? It is being distributed in the second premise because it is the subject of a standard form A claim. Okay, so which that means it is being distributed. So it satisfies that rule as well. So here we have an example of a valid categorical syllogism that has passed all three of the rules. Let's do another one. Premise 1, no hockey fans are football fans. Premise 2, some soccer fans are football fans. Conclusion, thus, no soccer fans are hockey fans. Okay, so there we have our categorical syllogism. Okay, let's go ahead and apply the rules. So we better have the same number, right? Rule 1, same number of negative claims in the conclusion as we have in the premises. Well, this is a negative claim, right? It's an E claim, which is negative. Okay, we have 1 in the first premise. That's also an E claim. Now this is an I claim, which is affirmative, right? So it's not a negative claim. So we have a total of 1 negative claim in the premises and 1 in the conclusion. So that rule is satisfied. Okay, the second rule, the middle term, the term not listed in the conclusion, which in this case is what? Hockey fans? No, football fans. Right, that one better be distributed in one of the premises. So football fans, right, it actually is distributed in this first premise, okay, because this is an E form claim, right, and we know that both the subject and the predicate are distributed in an E claim, okay, so we've satisfied that as well. Okay. And finally, any term distributed in the conclusion, okay, must be distributed in the premises. Well, again, an E claim, both of these are distributed, okay, so this is an E claim, meaning both the subject and the predicate are being distributed. So to satisfy rule 3, they better both be distributed somewhere in the first 2 premises as well. Okay. So let's see if soccer fans is distributed. It only appears once in the second premise. Okay. And now is it being distributed here? This is an I claim, right? And neither the subject nor the predicate are distributed in the standard form I claim. So it is not being distributed in the premises, right? It only appears once, and the one that it appears in, it's not being distributed. So we have violated, this argument violates rule 3, right? Namely, one of the terms, now hockey fans is distributed in the first premise, so that one is distributed, right? But one of the terms that's distributed in the conclusion is not distributed somewhere in the premises, okay? So that's why it would then violate rule 3. Let's do one more example here. Premise 1, all cats are animals. Premise 2, no cats are dogs. Conclusion, hence, no dogs are animals. And you might want to, at home, right, as you're watching this video, pause this before we go through it and I work through it with you, and see if you can apply these terms yourself or these rules yourself and figure out whether this is valid or not. But now we'll go ahead and push forward here and determine whether it's valid or whether it violates one or more of the rules. So first rule has to have the same number of negative claims in the conclusion as are in the premises, right? Here's a negative one. This is an E claim, which is always negative. No dogs are animals, that's 1 negative. The first premise is an A claim, which is affirmative, so that's not negative. But the second one is negative, it's also an E claim. So 1 equals 1, we've satisfied that. The second rule, again, the middle term, the one not appearing in the conclusion, okay, in this instance, what is it, cats? That middle term has to be distributed in one of the premises, right? So we have it appearing twice, okay, and it actually is distributed both times, right? Because it appears in the first premise as the subject of an A claim, and so it will be distributed in that instance, and then also appears in a standard form E claim for the second premise, and both the subject and the predicate are always distributed in an E claim. So it satisfies this as well. And the final rule, right, any term distributed in the conclusion will have to be distributed somewhere in the premises, okay? So again, all E claims, right, they have both their subject and their predicate distributed. So since we have an E claim in the conclusion, we better find both of these distributed somewhere in the premises because they're being distributed in the conclusion. Okay, so let's see if we can find dogs being distributed somewhere. Okay, dogs only appears once, okay, and it's in the second premise as the predicate of an E claim. Well, the predicate of an E claim is distributed. So dogs is distributed somewhere in the premises. What about animals? Okay, it only appears in the first premise, right, as the predicate of an A claim. Okay. Well, the predicate of an A claim is not distributed. So animals, which is distributed in the conclusion, is not distributed somewhere in the premises. So once again, this argument also, as was the case with the last one, violates Rule 3. So we would label this invalid. Okay. So hopefully you found these examples helpful. I really do think that the rules method is a nice tool to use to assess these categorical syllogisms. Once you get the hang of the idea of affirmative and negative claims, that's pretty straightforward. But then also maybe a little bit more difficult, the concept of distribution. Okay, which terms in each of these standard form claims are being distributed and which aren't. Once you kind of have a good feel for that and then sort of commit to memory these specific rules, then I think it's a piece of cake then to apply these rules to these various categorical syllogisms and really rather quickly determine whether they're valid or invalid. So hopefully you found this rule or this video helpful, and good luck again on your quiz and your homework exercises.